There's another article that's up today on Infowars.com that you wrote, Paul, about combat troops being sent back to Iraq. A veteran claims that his son was told his unit is being deployed in February of 2015. Now, this is coming right on the heels of more revelations that the Pentagon is going to send 500 troops to Iraq. You know, it was just last week that he said he was going to send about 300. Now that's nearly doubled. Now we see this article that you put up where this veteran is saying that his son's being told that he's going to be sent back to Iraq in February.
Well, that's right. Of course, last week, Obama came out and said that no U.S. troops would be sent back to Iraq. The day after, he announced that 300 special operations troops would be sent as advisors. Now with this whole ISIS threat being propped up, being generated, the fear-mongering being whipped up, of course, we know that the U.S. actually trained some of these ISIS terrorists back in 2012 at a secret base in Jordan. That's on the record. We've carried reports about that. So in supporting these jihadists in Syria, some of whom are aligned with ISIS, the Obama administration opened the door for them to then traverse into Iraq. Of course, they've now took control of major cities, major strategic outlets in Iraq. So we received this email, and since this article went up, I received more. The first email said, "We are being lied to about Iraq." This is from a U.S. Navy veteran talking about his son. "My son is being trained right now and will be deployed to Iraq in February 2015. He's been told by the U.S. Army that his unit will be sent for combat." Then I received another email just before we went on air about 15 minutes ago. A family friend who is a Marine currently stationed at Camp Lejeune, I think that's how you pronounce it,
yes,
was told by his gunnery sergeant they will be deployed to Iraq. The Marine stated that after they finish training at Lejeune, they will be sent to 29 Palms for desert warfare training, then to Camp Pendleton. From there, they will be stationed on an amphibious assault ship until deployment to Qatar and ultimately Iraq. So now we're getting more than just the initial email from these veterans whose sons are being told that their combat units will be sent to Iraq. The timing, of course, is somewhat in the future. That probably tells you that they're preparing for a much greater operation to try and take back those key Iraqi cities from the very insurgents that the Obama administration helped in the first place by supporting these jihadists in Syria.
Yeah, and of course, Yahoo News is reporting today that Obama is seeking $500 million. That's $500 million from Congress to help, quote unquote, moderate Syrian rebels. We know that all last year they were trying to do everything they could to start a war in Syria, and we were told years ago by Wesley Clark that they had a plan. They were going to go from this state in the Middle East to that one, to that one, to that one, and it was just like he said, the same sequence. And yet, as we push, the good news is that as we push back on their false flag attacks to try to get a war started in Syria, saying that there's a humanitarian crisis there because of sarin gas and the exposure that sarin gas possibly came from Saudi Arabia, but it certainly didn't look like the militarized or weaponized stuff that the Syrian forces would have. There were leaked reports that came out of the U.S. government that pushed back, the people within the U.S. government pushing back against the Obama administration, the people in that who were pushing for war. So we had a lot of pushback as the alternative media, as Infowars and others, stood up and exposed this. People within the government leaked information to show that this was a false flag. We had congressmen and former congressmen like Dennis Kucinich. We had Ted Cruz and others talking about us not being the Air Force for al-Qaeda in Syria, and yet Obama is not giving up on that either. Now he's going to send $500 million to train these good al-Qaeda that are in Syria.
Well, yeah, and he's talking about airstrikes in Syria as well. So the big myth, of course, is that there are any moderate rebels to begin with.
Right.
There were at the start of the conflict, the kind of political bloc. But the moderate rebels, most of them defected to the terrorist organizations like Jabhat al-Nusra. We documented that over the past 2 years. And, you know, the so-called moderate FSA commander plucking the internal organ out of his victim and eating it on camera, that's what they categorize as moderate, then God forbid what the extremists are up to. So again, the money, the arms are going to these so-called moderate groups who then pledge allegiance publicly to the terrorists, defect to the terrorists, and even the ones who don't as The Guardian reported, they're being commanded, they're being taught how to carry out suicide attacks, terrorist attacks, by the extremist factions. So you cannot differentiate between the moderates and the extremists when the two go hand in hand. They're allied with each other. And that's how ISIS has been allowed to grow, because they've swallowed up more and more of the so-called moderates, radicalized them. Now they're moving on. They've moved to Iraq. They've seized Mosul, a key town in Iraq. And now it's being used again to create the justification to send US troops back into Iraq, because you know, the permanent military bases that they set up there after the 2003 invasion, the US government, they were never really meant to be scaled back. That's why you see now Cheney and all these neocons in the media talking about how we now need to go back in, because they never planned to pull out in the first place. This was always going to be a decades-long occupation. So now they've got the convenient excuse of ISIS terrorizing the entire country as a result of their blowback policy. They trained some of them in Jordan in 2012, as I said before. And now Obama's saying that he doesn't need to get approval from Congress to send US troops back into Iraq indefinitely, just as he did before the attack on Libya. Totally disregarded Congress, said he didn't need any authorization. And we now see that same process unfolding again. And as I said, receiving numerous emails now from veterans who say their sons are being told they will be deployed to Iraq within the next 6 to 8 months.
You are watching the best of the Alex Jones Show, weekdays from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Central. Watch live at Infowars.com/show or become a member of InfoWarsNews.com and help us take resistance to the next level.